Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I would like you all to give a warm welcome to our main speaker. I totally forgot his name. Eddie, sorry.
Hi, my name is Ed and I'm an alcoholic. It's nice to be here. I want to thank Faith for asking me to come and for all her minions who've called me over the last month to remind me. If I don't say anything tonight, I want you to know that I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is bar none the greatest break I ever got in my life. And, I used to really want to do this. And I had a lot to say when I was new. I've heard talks that were just absolutely inspirational, only to have them followed by, and these have been the best 6 weeks of my life. I've been doing this for a long time now. Really, I've been clean and sober since December 18th, 1976, and I'm grateful for that. I originally came to AA in April of 1975 and made my first meeting in the fall of 1964. When I was 16 years old, I got sent, and I lacked what I believed to be the magic ingredient to make it in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't desperate. Our book talks about working with newcomers. If your man is not desperate enough to seek with eagerness what you have to offer, move on. And I was not desperate enough to seek with eagerness. I was 16 years old. I had just started drinking. I was banging on all 8, and it worked, and it was great. I got to loosen this thing. I take a martial arts class. I started my martial arts career at 52 years old. I figured that one out. And yesterday, we were doing choke from the back, and my partner got a little zealous and choked me hard. And this thing hurts. Glad I don't have to wear a tie for a living. Anyway, I was born and raised in, Karen asked me, has anything in my story changed? No, nothing has changed. It's the same old story. I only get one. I don't want to change my story. Not my drinking story. God forbid. I was born and raised in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's a lovely place. Cape Cod is the arm that sticks out on the state of Massachusetts. Worcester should be right there. At least that was my opinion. I know other people grew up there and loved it, but I didn't. Alcoholism took its toll on my family. My father was an alcoholic, and he left us when I was 2 years old. My dad had he spoke 5 languages, and he could order VO and water in every one of them. And my mom said I said my prayers in French when I was a baby. And Dad left when I was 2, and it was au revoir, papa. And my mother was an RN, and she raised my sister. I had a sister who was 2.5 years older than me, Rosie the redhead. And my mother raised my sister and I, and we grew up in this working class, basically Irish Catholic neighborhood. And there was a lot of drinking in the neighborhood. A lot of my friends' dads drank, and I was always fascinated by alcohol. I don't know why, but I always was. And then friends would steal a can of beer, and we'd get down behind the schoolyard when I was a kid and, drink a can of beer. And I never got enough. One night we were going to a dance, and this buddy of mine was Italian, and his grandfather made wine, and he got a quart of wine. And we had like 8 of us killed this quart of homemade wine. Get about enough to wet your whistle, and I didn't get enough. I never got enough. It didn't do anything for me yet. And one night when I was 16, my friends and I got together, and we decided that we were going to this party. We were all invited for a change to this party, and we were going to get drunk. That was the event of the evening. We were not going to have drinks. We were not going to have cocktails. We were going to get drunk. See what that was like. And so we went downtown, and we got an old man to buy us some booze. We got an old wino. And I got a half pint of VO. And I don't know why I picked it. There's 2 letters, I guess. It was easy to remember, VO. You know, thought the guy couldn't forget that. Go get me some VO. And so I got this half pint of VO, and I went off to the park with my friends, and I just sipped that. And about halfway through that 8 ounces of whiskey, I got nice. I got comfortable. I felt better than I had ever felt before in my life. It was magic. And I heard Clancy say something once, and he probably stole it from somebody else, but he said, alcohol filled holes in places in me where up until I drank, I didn't know I had places. It was magnificent. It was the best thing that ever happened, and I just sipped the rest of that half pint, and I went to that party, and it was down, this girl, his dad was a lawyer, and she lived in a nice part of town, and the party was down, everybody has cellars back there, and the cellar was done over into a rumpus room, and the party was going on, and we went downstairs, my partners and I, and there was this girl. She was a Malibu honey in the middle of Massachusetts. Her name was Donna Hanley. I say that because I wonder if I'll ever run into her again. And Donna, I was 16, Donna was 15. Donna had blonde hair and blue eyes, boobs, you know, and I get tongue-tied every time I get around Donna Hanley. And I walked over to Donna Hanley and I asked her to dance, which was amazing in itself because I only danced at home alone, you know. And I got out there and I started dancing. And Donna went, Eddie, I never knew you were so much fun. And I thought, Jesus, I never did either. This is fabulous, you know. And I had a great time that night, had a wonderful time. And wasn't sick or anything, you know, I was just loose and comfortable. And went home and didn't get caught. My mom always waited up for us. Didn't get caught, and went to bed. Get up the next morning, felt fine, felt wonderful, you know. And it says our disease is twofold. There's an analogy of the body coupled with an obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind was kicking that next morning. It was a Saturday morning, because I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait till next weekend till I get to do that again. That was fabulous. I want to do that again. That's all I could think of all that week in school was Friday night, going out, getting some booze, and getting drunk again. And Friday night came, and got together with my partners, went downtown, got another old man, bought the half pint of VO, went to the park, and I had a chug-a-lug contest with a friend of mine. He was a new drinker too, so neither one of us were that fast. But he had a 12-ounce can of Bud, and I had a half pint of VO, and I beat him. Yeah, ooh, it was right. You should not do that the second time you drink. You should not do that any time you drink. But the next half hour to 45 minutes, I went through about every physical and emotional change that a human being is capable of going through. I was laughing, crying, howling at the moon, barking like a dog. I blacked out. I passed out, found out later. I woke up the next morning, and I was down in a friend of mine's cellar at his house. And I was hungover. My tongue just felt like it had cotton all over it, and I was sick, and my head ached, and I heard all this laughter up at the top of the stairs. And to digress for a moment, I want to tell you that I have always been self-obsessed. Now, that is not conceit. That is self-obsession. I do not think well of myself. I just think about myself all the time. And anytime I ever walked into a room and I heard somebody laugh, I knew they were laughing at me, you know. Anytime I ever walked into a room and I heard somebody whisper, I knew they were whispering at me. And I heard all this whispering and laughter, talking and laughing upstairs, and I knew it was about me. And I came upstairs, and I was right for a change. It was. And I said, what happened? What did I do? And they told me, and I thought, well, you know, you were running around, and we tackled you and threw you in the car, and you were just crazy, and brought you here rather than take you home. And so I thought, well, if that's the price you got to pay, I'm willing to pay it. Because I like it. I like what this stuff does for me. And I made up some excuse while I was out all night, and I became a weekend drunk. And as I said, in the fall of 1964, I came home one night, and I forgot my key, and I came home a little early. My sister had a couple of girlfriends over the house, and my mom was there, and I knocked on the door, figuring I could just get in and get into my room, I'll be okay. I knocked on the door, and when the door opened, I passed out. And it just was like, it was like something out of a movie where the body just falls out of the closet, boom, in on the living room floor, and I reek of alcohol, and I remember my mother yelling, "You're just like your father, you're just like your father," and I looked just like him, and so, they got me in bed and put cold towels on my head, and I passed out or fell asleep or whatever, and I got up the next morning, and I was just ashamed and full of guilt. And during the night, everybody knew. My mother had called a parish priest, a family doctor. She'd called this friend of hers, this Jesuit, Father Jim. And she did private duty nursing, and she had taken care of Father Jim when he was, some years before, when he was detoxing from alcohol and pills in the hospital. He had to be put in the hospital. And they had remained friends over the years, and she called this priest up, this Jesuit, and it was arranged for me to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I went, and I went down in this church basement, and I looked around that room, and everybody was old. Of course, when you're 16, everybody is old, but you don't know that, and I was, as I said, I was banging on all 8, and I didn't want to be there. I wasn't desperate. And this guy took all the newcomers in a room, and he told his story, and he talked about things that I couldn't comprehend yet. And so I went on my merry way, and just wanted to keep drinking. But it did a funny thing. It planted a tiny little seed in the back of my head, and when I had poured enough alcohol and drugs on top of it, it sprouted, and I remembered that Alcoholics Anonymous existed. So just that one meeting probably saved my life. It took 11 years for me to get here after that. But so I'm out there drinking, and it's the 60s, and drugs start coming into Middle America, and I hear about them, and I want to try them. And so I got a connection for marijuana from these kids that went to university in my hometown, Clark University, mostly New Yorkers, studying psychology. It's the only place where Sigmund Freud ever spoke. And was able to score a nickel bag. Now, I don't think you can do that anymore. I'm pretty sure you can't buy a nickel bag of marijuana anymore. And Cliff Kelly and I split a nickel bag, and we got a corncob pipe, got told how to do it, got a corncob pipe, took the stem out, got some aluminum foil, poked holes in it, sprinkled this stuff on top, had seeds, fired that puppy up, the seeds are blowing up all over, hold it in, so you're hyperventilating, And I got stoned. I got really, really stoned, and Cliff didn't. He became a junkie later, figure it out. And Cliff didn't, but I got stoned, and I got paranoid and hungry, and I told Cliff to take a hike, and I went and got something to eat and went to bed, stuff, because I liked alcohol. Alcohol was predictable. I know what alcohol will do. I don't know where it'll take me, but I know how it'll make me feel, and drugs were different. But I found that if I mixed a little alcohol and a little weed, the buzz was kind of nice. And then I found something in high school I really liked. There was this girl, and she was real thin. And she had these pills that she was getting from this old doctor. And a lot of kids were going to this doctor. And she was selling them for 50 cents a piece, and they were these little black capsules. Yeah, I get the same reaction every time I talk about it. It said RJS on the side. Called them Black Beauties. And I tried them, and I liked them. And my idea of a really great time became 2 or 3 Black Beauties, a case of Bud, and a box of Chiclets to keep your throat from tightening up too bad. And then just grind your teeth down to nothing. Do that and feel your hair crawling across your head and talk about the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again all night long, and just drink and drink. You can drink a lot on speed. You can drink a lot and not pass out. But don't get amorous on speed, because nothing's going to happen. I have a friend, John. He says if it makes you, what does Peppermint John say? If it makes you paranoid and impotent, that's for me. That's kind of what it does to you. But boy, you can drink on it. And I took all kinds of stuff. I took a lot of LSD. Just the name acid should have told me, keep this out of your body. It scared the hell out of me, and I kept taking it because I never felt like a man, and I always thought I had to go at what frightened me rather than just back away from it and leave it alone. You know, I was the kind of user that I would take stuff and then ask what it was later. One night I went over to a friend's house and he opened up a thing of aluminum foil and he said, just wet your finger and eat some, Tom. And it was tarts, well. He goes, whoa, whoa. I said, well, what is it? He said, it's crystal methadone. I went, oh. And about a half an hour to 45 minutes later, I could feel a live wire wrapped around my heart, and I could hear it crackle. And I was looking at this picture, and it was moving. I was hallucinating on this stuff. And a couple of days later, I was starting to feel a little bit drowsy. And I wasn't real hungry. I wasn't hungry at all. Actually, I think I'd had a Cheerio. One. That's where, and coming down off that stuff was a bear, you know, and eventually I just stuck with booze. Things at home were very, very bad. You know, during my drinking and drug use, I was like 20 years old. I'm living at home, and my mother got ill. She got cancer, and she was dying, and she was on her deathbed, and she couldn't. I tell her I love her. She couldn't tell me she loved me, and I had a lot of resentment about that for a long time, and it wasn't until I was sober a number of years, and I was at this function, and there were a lot of kids. There were a lot of young parents with their children, and I looked at one of those kids, and they were perfect. They were absolutely perfect like that. They were perfect, and they were innocent, and they were full of all the promise in the world, and I had been like that. And for my mother to watch what alcohol and drugs turned me into broke her heart. And so I understood it, you know, but I didn't then. I was so hung up in myself. And I don't know I'm alcoholic. I just know I need something. Everybody around me knows there's something wrong, but I don't know that I have alcoholism. I know that I need to drink. And so I stayed sober for 30 days before she died. I quit drinking, and I came home every day, and when it came time to take her to the hospital about 4 days before she died, she called out for me. And she asked me to go with her, and I went, and I came out of her room, and this noise came out of me. And it was grief, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I got it out. And I went off to dinner that night with my cousins, and I ordered a beer. I don't know I'm alcoholic. I don't know that I have an allergy of the body, that when I ingest alcohol, something goes off in me that says, feed me. I had been in a car wreck. I know this, but I don't know it's alcoholism. I had been in a car wreck the year before, and actually the Christmas before that, in 1969, and a friend of mine, the first New Year's Eve that I was 21, a friend of mine brought me up a nip. He wasn't an alkie. He brought me up a nip of Calvert's, and I'm in the hospital, and I know I can't, to celebrate the New Year, I can't drink that nip because I have to have access to a lot before I can start it. I know this. I got to have a lot of booze there. I've got to be able, Chuck Chamberlain used to say if the Pacific Ocean were Jack Daniels, it would not be enough to slake my thirst. I don't drink to slake a thirst. I drink with an obsession. I drink because something goes off inside me that is different than other people that says, feed me. And when I feed it, it yells louder, feed me. And it keeps yelling and yelling and yelling, and I am dead drunk, conscious, laying in the gutter, and I want another drink. That's the kind of drunk I am. That's what happens when I drink. So I don't know this, and I go out that night, and I have a beer, and I'm off and running for the next 5 years. I'm drunk that night. And 4 years later, my redheaded sister got very ill. She had something called Crohn's disease, and her intestine ruptured, and she died from peritonitis. And I am living in an $11 a week room across the street from the factory that I was working in, and my life is miserable. I'm 25 years old, and my life is horrible. I'm a bum. And all I can feel is bad for me. Why couldn't it have been me? Why did she have to die? I would have gladly taken her place not because I loved her so much, but because I despised me. And I don't know what I've got, and all I can do is get drunk. And in April of 1975, I'd moved out of that flop and into another one. I moved in with my girlfriend for a while, and that was so insane that I had to get out of there. And I moved into another place, and everything and everybody I cared about was gone. And I got drunk one night, and my body was physically drunk, and my head wouldn't shut off. And I did some stuff, I was ramming my head into a wall. And I remembered it. And I thought, I got to stop drinking. You know, I got that moment of clarity. I said, I've got to stop drinking. And I remembered Alcoholics Anonymous. And I showed up, but it was my birthday, and I had to celebrate. And so I went out on a 3-day drunk. And I showed up back at my girlfriend's house. And I said, I'm going to call Alcoholics Anonymous in the morning, Peg. And I went to bed, and I got up the next morning, and I didn't want anything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted a Budweiser really bad. And she said, you said you were going to call him. And I didn't want to fight it. I didn't want to fight. And I said, all right, I'll call him. And they told me where there was a meeting, and would I like somebody to pick me up? And I said, no, you know, arrogant me. I'll get there on my own. And so I went to work that day, and I was on the wrong shift. And I was on probation, and they were waiting for me at Norton Abrasives, where I used to work. And they were waiting for me and said, we want to see you in the front office tomorrow. And I turned to my boss, and I was dead serious. I said, good, I'm going to have to leave early anyway. I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he literally threw his hands up in the air and went, you mean it? And I said, yes, I mean it. And he said, all right, be in here at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I hadn't even been here yet, and it saved my job. Not a bad deal. You know? So I wandered around that day. I didn't drink, and you know, I was shaking and sweating, and I could feel my joints jerk. And I went down to that meeting where they told me the meeting was going to be, and it was a cold, rainy night, and there was nobody milling around outside like there was here, and it was down in a church basement, and they had a black cardboard sign with the white letters AA on it, and I paced up and down, and I was terrified, like I'd never been terrified before, and I didn't know then why, and I do now, and I'll share it with you. I was terrified because I didn't know what went on inside of here. I didn't know what went on inside of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to know all the rules, and I want to look good at it before I'm willing to play the game. And you can't do that here. It takes a leap of faith. And my leap of faith was, oh, what the hell? And I walked in the door, and there was this guy, Everett. He was sober astronomical 17 years. And Everett was waiting inside the door, and he literally jumped out and grabbed me by the hand and said, welcome home. And I said, man, you don't understand. I can't drink anymore, man. I can't. It still makes me sad. And he said, we understand. We understand. Come in. And it was a newcomer meeting, and they hadn't had a newcomer in a long time, and I was it. And there were 14 people in that room, and an Al-Anon lady who they even let her share. A little different. And they let me ask questions. And I said, first question I asked was, am I ever going to lose the desire for a drink? Because I hadn't had a drink in 18 hours, and I was physically addicted to alcohol. And I was feeling bad. And another Jesuit was there, Father Charles, and he said, you will in time. And I didn't think a priest would lie to me. I thought, all right. And then I said, well, what am I going to do at the Patriots games? Because every time I went down to Schaefer Stadium, I had a beer in my hand. And they said, you handle that when you come to it. We do this a day at a time. And I thought, day at a time? Never heard that before. Never heard that, day at a time. And the guy that met me at the door had 17 years, and there was a guy, Father Charles had like 9 years, and there was a fellow that had Joe, who became my sponsor. He had 5 years. And they told me this, that they had been sober this amount of time. There was another guy with a year. And I can't comprehend this. I haven't had a drink in 18 hours. I don't know anybody that doesn't drink. If you drink like I drink, you cannot not drink for that long. And there was a guy, Woody, and Woody had 30 days. And I literally grabbed Woody when he told me he had 30 days. I went, how'd you do it? And he was trying to get away from me. He went, a day at a time, a day at a time. You know, and I thought maybe I could get 30 days. A day at a time just kind of went, shh. But you know what? That's all I could do. It was a day at a time. And they asked me to come back, and I hadn't been, asked back anywhere in a long time. And I came back on Mondays for the next couple of weeks, and I didn't drink. I went to one meeting a week. I heard this guy Joe say in the third week, if you don't get a sponsor, you might get drunk. And I didn't know what a sponsor was, but I knew I didn't want to get drunk. I was feeling better. I was physically feeling a lot better. I was young, and I rebounded really quickly. And I said, well, will you be my sponsor? And he said, I'd be proud to. And so he did what sponsors do. He introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I would go out to his hometown. He was from Leicester, Mass. And I would go to Leicester to meet him, or he would come into Worcester and meet me. And we would go to meetings, and he introduced me to AA. And he made it a safe, comfortable place for me to be, and I loved it. I loved it from the very beginning. And I heard these stories, I remember hearing this guy once. He was a young guy, and he His name was Carmine. He was from Providence. They have panels back there, and they bring in a panel, and they do the meeting with this, they bring all the speakers. And this guy Carmine had 9 months, an astronomical 9 months of sobriety. He was about my age. He was a big guy, and he had his shirt open. He had a tattoo of the devil on his chest. And he said, the only reason I went to high school was to beat up the teachers. And he was an AA god, He was like, damn, But I heard these stories that made me laugh, and I laughed from my gut, and I hadn't laughed in a long time. And I heard a guy say something, and I don't know why. I didn't hear the steps and the traditions, but I heard this stuff that stuck with me. I never forget this man. He was in a suit, just like I am now, and he was an older guy like I am now, and he said, that profanity was a sign of a conversational cripple. And I thought, fucking A. I had been educated by nuns, and you didn't curse, and I had a good vocabulary, and I was fairly bright, and I had a rotten mouth. I was very streety when I got to AA, and I have to still watch that today. I work in construction and in motion picture business, and it's a macho atmosphere, and I catch myself a lot, and I don't like it, and I'm trying to get better at it. And that's what this whole thing is for me, is this process of Alcoholics Anonymous, is I'm just a day at a time trying to be a better person. So I loved AA, and I was sober 6 months, and I did a geographic, and I moved to Arizona, and there were friends from AA that were in Arizona, and I had a tough time giving up the old friends in the beginning, and after 6 months and 10 days of going across the country with a couple of old buddies, I didn't want anything to do with them anymore, but I was kind of stuck, and I needed to get a job. I didn't have any money, and I mustered up all the potential that I had, and I went up to the Hitching Post car wash in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I got a job as a backer-outer. And after 4 days, they saw that I had talent and made me a driver-upper. And they gave tips at the end of the day. They split the tips, and thank God, because I was able to eat. And I finally, I left there and got a job as a janitor at this country club and saved a little money, and I got my own apartment, my first real apartment. I had shared apartments with people, and I had lived in flops, but I never had my own place. And I got a little motorcycle. I had my own transportation, my own apartment, and I remember going down. I like to talk about my telephone. I went down to the phone company to get my phone. I got a telephone, my first telephone I got to get installed, and I went down there and I said, I'd like to get a phone, and they said yes, and I gave them all the information. They said, would you like an unlisted number? And I went, hell no. How are people in AA going to get in touch with me? No, I want everything, name, address, zip code, you name it, And when the phone book came out a few months later, I was like Steve Martin in the movie The Jerk, running down there, the new phone book's here, the new phone book's here. And I went right to the R's, and there I was, and I looked me up, and there I was, Edward A. Regan, 31st Street, Phoenix, Arizona, whatever my phone number was, but it didn't just say that, it said citizen. I was a citizen of the world, and I had never been that. I had always lived on the fringe. There's a guy in AA who talks about being proud to be part of the lunatic fringe of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to be part of the fringe of anything. I want to be right in the middle of it. The eye of a hurricane is the calmest place in a hurricane. Right in the middle. That's where it's safe. Right in the middle of AA. Active in Alcoholics Anonymous is safe for me. So I left Arizona. I was at a Christmas party on December 18th, 1976, my current sobriety date, and I had been to a meeting that day, and it wasn't an AA party, and I was sitting on a couch, and somebody fired up a joint, took a toke, and they handed it to me, and I was going to hand it to this person over here, and it got right here, and it talked to me. It literally talked to me and said, you never had a problem with drugs, Ed. Your problem was alcohol. I went, you're right. Uh-oh. I got a problem. I was as stoned as I'd ever been, and it owned me. And I hated that. I hated that feeling. The drug had me. But I thought, I went to my sponsor, and I thought time meant something in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, Charlie, I smoked dope. Now, Charlie was the only man I have ever met that absolutely loved World War II. Charlie had been gut shot in the Battle of the Bulge. He'd been bayoneted through the back of his leg in hand-to-hand combat. I mean, Charlie was an awesome guy, but he was a piece of work, and he had no drug knowledge. He was a gin man. And he said, well, just don't do it no more. And I said, okay. And I had a friend, Bill Conley. Bill had 5 daughters, and he was a friend in the program. He'd taken me in like a son, and he was dying. He was ill and in the hospital, and I went to see him. Bill was from the Bronx, and I told him I'd smoked pot, but I didn't think it counted. And he looked at me out of that bed, and I could close my eyes and see him now. And he said, you weren't sober. You weren't sober. You know, I couldn't give it up. I couldn't give it up. That was my, that made me somebody in AA. And I'd been nobody for so long. How could I give that up? And so I moved to California nearly 2 years later, and I was living in Orange County. And they would take cakes, and they say, free from alcohol, pot, pills, anything that affects you from the neck up, from the neck up, from the neck up. It's like, shut up. People would say, how long are you sober? And I'd tell them, and my head would go, it's a lie. And so I went to my sponsor, and I said, I smoked dope nearly 2 years ago. What do you think I should do about it? And he said, what do you think you should do about it? And I knew, and it says in the big book, admit your faults freely to your fellows. And I got called on to share as a 10-minute speaker at a big meeting down there at the Ebell Club. And I told him that I wasn't sober as long as I said I was, that I had smoked marijuana nearly 2 years before. And the funny thing happened, you know what? Nobody said, oh, a liar, get out. No liars allowed here. They just said, good for you. It was no big deal. I had a lot of problems with work. I couldn't hang on to a job, and I was turning 30. I turned 30. I was 30 years old, living down there, and I was in great physical shape, but I was in bad mental shape by the end of a year in Newport Beach. And it was suggested that I come up and talk to Clancy, and so I did. And I came up and I got involved in the Pacific Group, and I jumped in with both feet, which is what you should do there. And it was a safe, loving place for me to be for 9 years. And I came unglued in sobriety. And they put me back together. They kept me busy, and they kept me active with service. They kept me involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they had an ethic about getting a job and staying on it for a year and getting a vacation, and being a citizen again. And it took me a long time to do that. Finally, I got this job. God, I hated this job. I was killing rats and bugs. I was working for a company called Ace Pest Control. They used to tell me you have to learn to think like a rat. If it flies, it dies. If it crawls, it falls. That was my motto. And I learned to do something there that I had never done before. I learned to be, as it says in our big book, to be a worker among workers. To be a worker among workers. See, because I want you to treat me special on every job I go on. I want you to tell me how great I am and to pat me on the back and to give me all these attaboys so that I'll just feel equal. Treat me special, as I've heard in AA, so that I'll feel equal. And it doesn't work that way in the real world. My attaboy is my paycheck. And I had to learn that. I learned that lesson the hard way. And I became a good employee at Ace Pest Control. And I did a couple of years there and then moved on and became a salesman. And I wasn't that hot. All this time I'm active in AA, and I've worked the steps again. And, I'm sponsoring people, and I'm sponsored. And I got this job as a salesman, and I wasn't a self-starter. I'd rather go to the gym. And at the end of it, they like me, but at the end of a year, my draw was running out and wasn't quite cutting it. And I had a friend in the program, and she knew I was enamored of show business, and she got me an interview at Lorimar, and they needed somebody. At first, it was for the mailroom, and I didn't get the job, but they liked me in the interview. And I thought, geez, I don't have a lot of schooling, and I'm not really trained to do anything. What's going to happen to me? I remember a friend of mine got this big job, and he told me, everything he had done in his life, all the work he had done, he was perfect for this job. And all I could think, all self-obsessed, was, geez, I'd never learned to do anything. What's going to happen to me? Well, you never know, because a job came up at Lorimar making coffee. And I had learned to make coffee in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I became the coffee king. They called me up, they liked me, and they brought me in. And for 2 years, I was the coffee king of Lorimar. And I knocked on doors. I wanted to get into props. I knew they made good money out on the lot, and this was an entry-level job. And I wanted to get in props, and I knocked on doors for a couple of years, and I got a shot at being a laborer. And so I took it, and that's what I've done for the last 14 years nearly. It's been a laborer. I work construction and motion pictures, and I have a lot of fun. I have a great life. I have a great job. And it's all because of Alcoholics Anonymous. The best I would have ever done in Worcester was maybe night foreman at Norton Abrasives. I love it out here. I live in Southern California. I work in the movies. I actually got a credit on a couple of things. I can't tell you. You can ask me later, though. But it says Ed R., labor foreman. I thought that was it's a nice perk. I mean, it doesn't mean anything, but it's a nice perk. I thought it was kind of, the first time I saw it, I thought it was awesome. It's like, damn, it's like, I always wanted my name up up in lights, not as the labor foreman, but hey, it's okay. God has a sense of humor. I still have alcoholism, and I know that. That's why I have to, that's why I remain active, and I have to apply these steps to my life. I read the 24-hour book every day, and I got in a hurry this morning, and I didn't read it. And I had some stuff to do. I was off today, and I went to another martial arts class, and went over to the valley to do some shopping, and I decided the freeway was packed, so I went over to Panga. 2 cars in front of me is this beautiful, cherried out old Camaro, like a 67 Camaro. What were they, like 390s, Pete, something like that? Man, anyway, I mean, this thing is just clean, only it's going real slow. And all the way from the valley to the ocean, there's like a parade behind us. And I am going nuts. I mean, it's like I'm looking at the signs, 25 miles an hour, and she's going 22 miles an hour. It's like, come on. And I'm like ranting and raving. God damn. And I'm not, I'm like, and I'm screaming, I'm alone in the car, And I get up next to him, finally, where you get to the ocean, Topanga splits, and I look, and it's this old guy and this old lady, and he's obviously, letting her drive what it appears to me is he's letting her drive his hot rod. This is the car he loves. And they're in their, like, late 60s. And I'm like, and so I read it tonight, and it was make the world, the meditation for the day was basically about making the world a better place by being in it. And I wasn't doing that because I let my disease get carried away. And that's what happens sometimes, is that this is a process. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is a process. It's not an event. I will never lose my alcoholism. It's always going to be there. It is the disease that manifests itself mostly in the mind, and it is here. And I have a daily reprieve from it, a daily reprieve, contingent on my spiritual maintenance. And when I'm working that, my life is glorious. And when I'm not, it rears its ugly head, and I have to be very careful of that. This thing is there. It's not going away. It's always going to be there. And I can live with that. I have no problem with my character defects until I see them reflected in your eyes, the horror. And I realize, oh God, it's me. It's not them. I have to go work on myself. And so I do. And I will continue to. I'm so blessed. I'm just so blessed that I have this place to come to, and I have the life I have today, and I have friends like I have. When I used to leave that flop, when I used to leave that Peterson house where I was paying, I left this place $300, owing $300 in back rent. It was $11 a week. That went up to $15. They used to turn the heat off at 11 o'clock at night and turn it back on at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been in Massachusetts in the dead of winter, but it gets cold back there. I don't live like that anymore. I have a glorious life. I have friends like Pete this summer. Pete and I and a bunch of people I have a motorcycle, and we rode our motorcycles to Sturgis, South Dakota. What a hoot. I mean, saw Mount Rushmore, Devil's Tower, and, sure beats the hell out of the buffalo pen at Green Hill Park, I'll tell you. It's so nice. I have a glorious life. I don't have any kind of a special life, and it says, in the big book that we will live reasonably happy lives. There's some great stories in AA of recovery, but most of us are going to get, at best, reasonably happy lives. And I have a reasonably happy life today because of AA. I have a God in my life that if you had asked me what I wanted when I got here, God was not one of the things. I was raised a Roman Catholic, and I was afraid of God. I thought God put a mark in a book every time you touched yourself or something, and you were going to hell. And it isn't like that. I have a loving God. I had an experience when I was sober a couple of years that let me know at a very personal level that God existed. But today, mostly I accept on faith that there is God there. I would rather go through my life, believing that there is than trying to prove there's not. So I accept my God on faith, and my God is loving. and I found a place, you know, that I belong, and that's Alcoholics Anonymous. I belong here. I never felt like I fit out there. I could never get drunk enough or loaded enough to feel like they looked, you know. The really slick people, I just could never get there, and here I fit. You know, when Everett welcomed me home, I thought, you know, home is not the thing to say to me. Home was crazy, and I made it crazy. It wasn't all me, but I made it crazy. And I am home. You know, Father Leo, I heard talking, I heard him a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't do the E.T. thing. He did something else, but I stole this from him, and I still give him credit. And he might have taken it from somebody else, but remember the movie E.T.? And E.T. had to go home because if he didn't get amongst his own kind, he would die. If I didn't get amongst you, I'd have died. I am home. And I owe till the day I die, and I owe it to the next alien who walks through the door that there be somebody there to give him a handshake and a cup of coffee, or a half a cup in my case, and a seat to sit down in and to welcome him home. Thank you for having me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.